Help me reach 1,000 subscribes. Support the video with a like and leave your thoughts in the comments. I read every comment. Thanks. I never imagined a single sentence could erase 13 years of my life. Yet there it was, hanging in the air like a guillotine. "I don't love you anymore," she said, eyes fixed on the ceiling, as though she were delivering a weather report instead of shattering my world. My name is Nathan, 38, born and raised in Chicago, and I thought our marriage with Emma was strong enough to survive the ordinary grind of life. Bills, work, exhaustion. But apparently, even that kind of love could quietly dissolve. It had started subtly years ago, almost imperceptibly. Emma was once the laughter that filled our apartment. Her presence magnetic and warm, drawing me out of my own quiet tendencies. I was a civil engineer, pragmatic, dependable, never flamboyant, never dramatic. She had told me once she loved that steadiness, that I kept her grounded. In those first 5 years, we were inseparable. The nights spent cooking together, long drives with no destination. Teasing texts during the day. They were my life's rhythm, and hers too, or so I had thought. Then things changed. At first, it was the small things. She would flinch when I brushed her shoulder. Her laughter, once effortless and infectious, became mechanical, a hollow sound I could barely recognize. Even our shared weekend began to feel like exercises in endurance. She'd retreat to her phone or disappear into long showers while I tried to salvage fleeting moments of connection. I brushed it off, blamed her work as a senior editor at the publishing house, told myself I had to be patient. I cooked, cleaned, ran errands, all to maintain a semblance of normalcy. But patience has a limit. One Thursday evening, I had set up a quiet dinner at our favorite rooftop bistro. Candles flickered, city lights glowing below us. I leaned across the table, trying for intimacy, saying the simple words I had repeated countless times. "I miss us." She looked at me with those tired, distant eyes and said, "Nathan, I just don't feel that way anymore." That sentence, so ordinary, so flat, was a bomb detonating in slow motion. My chest tightened, my stomach lurched. There was no yelling, no screaming, no tears. Just that quiet, final line. I realized in that love isn't always dramatic in its ending. Sometimes it leaves you in a quiet, almost surgical stillness, where everything familiar suddenly feels alien. The drive home was silent. Emma fiddled with her phone, scrolling endlessly as if scrolling could somehow undo her words. The apartment smelled the same, our furniture untouched, our life visually intact, but emotionally, everything had collapsed. I set my bag down in the bedroom, paused, and stared at our bed. The sheets smelled of her perfume, a faint trace of a love that had evaporated. I had been blind, or perhaps too loyal, to notice the slow erosion. The realization burned. She had checked out long before she had ever said the words. I began to pack quietly that night, not in anger, not in vindication, but in clarity. Clothes, toiletries, essentials. Everything I might need to start living in a world where love was no longer a given. I moved slowly, methodically, as though the very act of packing could erase the years of silence and distance. By the time I slung my bag over my shoulder, it felt heavier than any suitcase should. In the kitchen, I left a note on the counter. Nothing dramatic, just the facts. "I'm gone. Please respect my space." I didn't want an argument, a confrontation, or a scene. I wanted closure, and closure requires distance. The night was crisp as I stepped outside. The streetlights cast long shadows across the pavement, and for the first time in months, I felt air fill my lungs fully. My chest, heavy with grief, began to lift. Not entirely, but enough to realize that the paralysis of trying to fix something already broken had ended. I drove aimlessly at first, not knowing where to go, only knowing I had to leave the apartment that had become a mausoleum of memories. I ended up in a small, quiet suburb on the outskirts of the city, where my friend Lucas lived. He had offered his couch weeks ago during one of our long conversations, when he sensed the tension in my voice, but I hadn't yet admitted to myself what was happening. I parked outside his modest home and stayed in the car for a long while, staring at the dashboard, the hum of the city below me muffled by the thoughts echoing in my head. When I finally walked up to his door, Lucas opened it, eyebrows raised. "Nathan, everything okay?" I forced a smile, one that didn't quite reach my eyes, and said, I needed to sleep somewhere else tonight. I didn't explain. There were no words that could encapsulate the quiet devastation and relief that mingled inside me. He nodded and stepped aside. I felt a strange serenity cross me as I settled on his couch, the soft of the ceiling fan above a comforting constant. Lying there, staring at the ceiling, I realized the truth. Sometimes love doesn't end in chaos. It ends in silence. And sometimes the only way to survive that silence is to walk away quietly, to vanish without spectacle, leaving the person who abandoned you in the world they chose for themselves. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, whether Emma would realize the gravity of what she had done, or if she even cared. But for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe without holding my grief in check, like I could reclaim a piece of myself lost in the slow erosion of indifference. That night, I slept not with the warmth of her body beside me, but with the sharp, clear edge of clarity and self-preservation. And in that quiet, empty space, I understood something essential. Love is not always loud, but the absence of it echoes louder than any fight ever could. I woke to the first faint light of morning filtering through Lucas's curtains, the apartment silent except for the soft hum of the heater. I felt an unusual calm, a strange clarity settling over me. My phone buzzed intermittently on the coffee table, messages from co-workers, family, even Emma, but I ignored them all. For the first time, I realized I didn't have to answer to anyone, didn't have to justify my presence or my absence. By mid-morning, I had made a plan, not a dramatic revenge, not a confrontation, but a quiet reclaiming of my life. I withdrew money from my account, rented a small apartment downtown, and began the slow process of creating a world where I existed first. Emma's absence, once a source of pain, became a vacuum I could finally fill with myself. I went through our old photos, not with anger, but with acceptance. Years of shared smiles, vacations, late-night talks. They belonged to the past now. And the past, I realized, didn't need to haunt me. Later that day, I drove past her old apartment. The lights were on, but the warmth was gone. I saw her silhouette moving in the kitchen, still focused on her phone. A pang of recognition shot through me. Memories of laughter, whispered promises, quiet mornings in bed. But I didn't stop. I didn't knock on the door. I didn't want to witness the life I had lost. Instead, I drove to a small cafe near the river, ordered a coffee, and sat by the window, watching the world move with a rhythm I was beginning to reclaim. A week passed in quiet increments. Emma tried reaching out once, a single text. Nathan, can we talk? I didn't reply. I didn't have to. The quiet I had fought for, the peace I had sought in absence, was mine to keep. Each day, I rebuilt a little piece of myself, long-forgotten hobbies, walks along the lake, conversations with friends who had been patient, waiting for me to emerge from the fog. Then, something unexpected happened. Lucas invited a few friends over one evening, a small gathering in his living room. Among them was Claire, a friend I had met once at a work event, but barely known. We started talking quietly, and for the first time in months, I laughed, a full, unguarded laugh. Not the polite chuckle I had reserved for Emma or co-workers, but laughter that came from recognition of my own value, my own humanity. Claire didn't rush me, didn't judge the weight I carried. She listened, simply listened, and in her eyes, I saw a reflection of the respect and attention I had been starving for, the kind that had evaporated in my marriage long ago. One night, as I returned to my new apartment, I found a note slipped under the door. Simple, precise, but impossible to ignore. Nathan, we need to talk. Emma. My chest tightened, old impulses stirring, but I paused. I read the note again, and for the first time, I realized I didn't need to respond. My life was no longer subject to her whims or her sudden decisions. I could let the past remain exactly where it belonged. Days later, I learned through mutual friends that Emma had begun dating someone new. I felt a brief flicker of shock, a sharp twinge of jealousy, but it passed quickly, replaced by a strange, liberating satisfaction. She had chosen to leave, and in doing so, she had liberated me from the slow, invisible suffocation of a love that no longer existed. The silence that once crushed me now carried a resonance of freedom. Then came the most shocking revelation. A mutual acquaintance mentioned that Emma had confided in a close friend that she hadn't left because she no longer cared for me entirely. She had left because she had fallen for someone else, someone she considered more exciting, more alive. I felt a sharp sting at first, the kind that lingers in your chest for days. But the sting was not pain, it was clarity. I hadn't lost to another man. I had simply regained the right to live without the weight of a relationship that had died quietly under her indifference. Weeks later, I sat by the river, a journal open on my lap, reflecting on everything that had passed. I wrote about the quiet erosion of love, the subtle ways a partner can slip away while you remain blind, the slow heartbreak that accumulates without spectacle. And I wrote about the strength it takes to vanish, to leave without yelling, without revenge, without drama, simply to reclaim yourself. Emma reached out one final time, a hesitant email, trying to justify her choices, to apologize, to manipulate guilt. I read it once, folded the phone, and put it aside. There was no closure to give her, no conversation that could undo the years lost. My life had moved forward. The silence she had left behind was mine to keep, not as a void, but as a canvas to rebuild, to live fully, to breathe freely. By the end of the month, I had moved completely into my new apartment, the echo of our old life fading like mist in the morning sun. Friends came and went, laughter filled the rooms, and Claire and I grew closer, not as a replacement, not as revenge, but as a new chapter built on mutual respect and authentic connection. I had learned the ultimate lesson. Sometimes the most powerful action is not confrontation, not pleading, not reconciliation, but disappearance. Quiet, deliberate, complete disappearance. And in that disappearance, I found something Emma could never take. Myself. The man who had been invisible in his own home for years now stood fully in the light, unburdened, unshackled, and shockingly at peace.